What you thought was the end has a peculiar way of feeling final. It carries a weight that presses on the chest and whispers with convincing authority that nothing meaningful can come after this moment. Ends feel absolute because they arrive wrapped in loss, disappointment, silence, or exhaustion. They come when prayers seem unanswered, when doors close without explanation, when strength runs out before the journey does. And so the human heart, which longs for patterns and predictability, assumes that what has stopped must be finished forever. Yet this assumption, though understandable, has always been one of our greatest misunderstandings about the way God works in a life. We are inclined to believe that God speaks most clearly through success, clarity, and visible progress. We imagine his voice as something loud, unmistakable, and public. But again and again, the story of faith tells us that God often chooses quieter methods. He works beneath the surface in hidden places, in seasons that look empty to the eye, but are crowded with unseen activity. The soil looks still in winter, yet it is not idle. Roots grow in darkness long before leaves ever appear in light. The end you are staring at may simply be the moment when God has decided to stop doing one kind of work, so he can begin another that could not exist before. There is something deeply unsettling about new beginnings because they rarely arrive with the dignity we expect. We imagine beginnings as clean, hopeful, and energetic. In reality, they often arrive disguised as grief, confusion, or failure. They come when you are tired rather than ready, when faith feels smaller rather than stronger. God does not wait for us to feel prepared before he begins rewriting a story. If he did, very few stories would ever be rewritten at all. Instead, he starts precisely at the point where human ability reaches its limit, because only then can the work clearly be his. We tend to treat our lives as linear narratives, believing that if chapter 1 leads to chapter 2, then chapter 2 must logically lead to chapter 3. But God is not bound by the neat structure we prefer. He interrupts, he revises. He allows chapters to end abruptly so that the reader, and especially the one living the story, is forced to admit that they are not the author. When something you trusted collapses, it feels like chaos, but it may actually be correction. Not punishment, but redirection. Not abandonment, but rearrangement. The great fear at the heart of every ending is the fear of meaninglessness. We ask, often without words, was all of that for nothing? The effort, the love, the obedience, the waiting. Yet God is not wasteful. He does not discard experiences the way we discard broken objects. What looks like a failure to you may be raw material to him. He reshapes rather than replaces. He redeems rather than erases. The ending you mourn may be the very thing that makes room for a depth of life you could not have known otherwise. God's rewriting of a story does not usually begin with external changes. It begins inwardly, where no one applauds and no one notices. He changes how you see, how you listen, how you hope. Before he alters circumstances, he often alters perspective. This is why the same situation can crush one person and quietly strengthen another. God is less concerned with how quickly you escape difficulty than with who you become while walking through it. He knows that a new future sustained by an old heart would simply recreate old wounds in a different setting. It is tempting, in moments of loss, to believe that God has grown distant. Silence can feel like absence, but silence in the hands of God is often a form of speech we have not yet learned to understand. Just as a teacher grows quiet during an exam, not because they have stopped caring, but because the lesson has reached a critical moment, God sometimes withdraws obvious signs so that faith may grow roots rather than rely on constant reassurance. A faith that survives silence becomes a faith that can endure almost anything. When God rewrites a story, he rarely consults our sense of timing. We want swift resolutions and clear explanations. God seems far more patient. He allows questions to linger, not because answers do not exist, but because instant answers would often close us off from deeper truths. There are things that can only be learned slowly, truths that require experience rather than explanation. If God told us everything at once, we might understand the facts, but we would miss the wisdom. One of the most uncomfortable truths about new beginnings is that they require the surrender of control. You cannot step into something genuinely new while clinging to the certainty of the old. God often waits until our grip loosens, not out of cruelty but out of necessity. As long as we insist on managing the outcome, we limit what he can do. Trust, in its truest form, is not the confidence that things will turn out as we want, but the assurance that God remains good even if they do not unfold according to our expectations. There is also a strange mercy in endings. They prevent us from living forever in what was never meant to last. Some doors close not because you failed, but because you stayed longer than the season allowed. God closes those doors gently at first, with discomfort and restlessness, and then more firmly when we refuse to move. What feels like loss may actually be rescue, sparing you from becoming permanently attached to something that would eventually diminish you. As God rewrites a life, he often brings memories to the surface, not to torment, but to heal. Past pain, unresolved grief, forgotten disappointments reappear, asking to be seen in the light of grace rather than buried in silence. This process can feel like regression, as though you are moving backward rather than forward. But healing often looks like reopening wounds, so they can be properly treated. God does not expose pain to shame you, he exposes it to free you. The new beginning God is forming may not resemble the future you once imagined. This is perhaps the hardest part to accept. We grieve not only what we lost, but what we hoped would come from it. Yet God's imagination is larger than ours. He sees possibilities beyond the narrow paths we planned. When he says, all things are being made new, he does not mean slightly improved versions of the old. He means transformed, reimagined, infused with purpose that could only emerge after the breaking. Faith, in this sense, is not blind optimism. It is a disciplined refusal to believe that the present moment has the final word. It is choosing to trust God's character when his methods confuse us. It is standing in the middle of an unfinished sentence and believing that it will eventually make sense, even if you cannot yet hear the full meaning. Faith does not demand that you feel hopeful all the time. It asks only that you remain open, that do not close the door on God while he is still working. When you look back one day, you may realize that the ending you feared was the moment your story gained its depth. Comfort rarely produces wisdom. Ease seldom builds courage. It is often through loss that compassion grows, through waiting that patience forms, through uncertainty that trust matures. God is not in a hurry to make your life impressive. He is intent on making it true. And so, if you find yourself standing among the ruins of what once was, do not assume that God has finished with you. Ruins are not the opposite of creation, they are often the starting point. God has always been skilled at bringing life out of places that seem beyond repair. He speaks into emptiness and calls it possibility. He steps into endings and quietly begins again, not with spectacle but with purpose, not with haste but with intention. Even now, while you are still naming what was lost, he is already at work shaping what is to come, weaving meaning into moments you have not yet learned how to interpret, guiding you forward not by erasing your past, but by transforming its weight into something that can carry you toward a future still unfolding, a future where the story continues in ways you could not have predicted, where the sentence you thought had reached its final period is slowly revealing itself to be only a pause, a breath, a turning of the page, as God continues to write, line by line, through ordinary days and unseen choices, through quiet obedience and fragile hope, through questions that remain unanswered and prayers that are still forming, until even this moment you now call an ending begins to show traces of meaning, threads of purpose, hints that something new is already beginning to move beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise into view. That quiet movement beneath the surface, rarely anew. NCES itself. It does not demand attention or prove its importance, it simply persists. God's work in a soul often resembles a slow reshaping, rather than a dramatic reversal. He adjusts desires before circumstances, convictions before outcomes. While you wait for something obvious to change, he may be altering the very lens through which you see your life. And when that lens changes, the world itself appears different, not because it has transformed overnight, but because you are no longer standing in the same place within it. One of the reasons endings feel so unbearable is that they strip away our familiar explanations. We grow accustomed to telling ourselves a particular story about who we are and where we are going. When that story collapses, we feel exposed, uncertain of how to introduce ourselves even to our own thoughts. God does not rush to replace that story with a new label. Instead, He allows a season of unknowing, a sacred pause in which identity is loosened from achievement and worth is separated from outcome. In that space, uncomfortable as it is, something truer can begin to form. There is a humility that comes from realizing you do not fully understand your own life. This humility is not weakness, it is openness. God works most freely in those who admit they are not finished products. Certainty can be a subtle barrier to transformation. When you insist on knowing exactly what your life must look like, you may overlook what it is becoming. God's rewriting often requires us to become learners again, attentive to small lessons, patient with slow growth, willing to be shaped rather than instantly satisfied. Many people mistake God's patience for indifference. They assume that because relief has not arrived, concern must be absent. But patience in God's economy is an expression of care. He waits not because He is unable, but because He is intentional. He understands that some changes, if forced too quickly, would break what they are meant to heal. Just as a bone must be set carefully to avoid permanent damage, a life must be restored with wisdom rather than haste. It is also worth noticing that God often allows us to feel the full weight of an ending before He reveals the beginning hidden within it. He does not numb the pain artificially. Grief, disappointment, and longing are not enemies of faith. They are evidence that something mattered. God does not ask you to pretend that loss is painless. He meets you honestly, not in denial, but in truth. And truth, though sharp at first, eventually becomes a doorway rather than a wound. As the story unfolds, you may find yourself revisiting old prayers, not to repeat them, but to see them differently. What once sounded like desperation may now read as trust in disguise. What felt like unanswered requests may reveal themselves as protection. God's rewriting includes reinterpretation. He does not only add new chapters, He gives new meaning to the old ones. This is why the past does not lose its power over you by being forgotten, but by being understood within a larger narrative of grace. There is a temptation to measure progress by visibility. We want signs we can point to, milestones we can announce. Yet much of God's most significant work happens quietly, without witnesses. Character grows unseen. Faith deepens without applause. Courage is often forged in moments no one else knows about. When you choose hope over bitterness, prayer over resignation, obedience over ease. These choices may feel small, but they accumulate, shaping a future that rests on a foundation far stronger than circumstance. The rewriting of a story also involves learning to live without constant clarity. God rarely explains Himself fully, not because He enjoys mystery for its own sake, but because relationship requires trust. A life guided by God is not one where every step is illuminated in advance, but one where the direction becomes clearer as you move. This can feel unsettling to a mind trained to demand certainty, yet it is precisely this forward movement, taken without full understanding, that strengthens faith into something resilient and mature. You may notice that as God works, your prayers begin to change. They become less about controlling outcomes and more about alignment. Instead of asking only for circumstances to shift, you ask for wisdom, patience, and courage. This is not a sign that you have settled for less. It is a sign that your desires are being refined. God's rewriting does not diminish your hopes, it purifies them, removing what would ultimately disappoint and strengthening what can endure. There is also an unexpected generosity in new beginnings. When you have known loss, you become more attentive to the pain of others. Compassion grows naturally in those who have been broken and restored. God often uses endings to soften hearts, making room for empathy that could not have existed before. In this way, your story becomes connected to others, not isolated. The comfort you eventually receive does not end with you. It flows outward, quietly shaping lives in ways you may never fully see. At times, the process feels repetitive, as though the same lessons return again and again. This can be discouraging, making you wonder whether you are truly moving forward. But repetition is not stagnation. Just as a spiral revisits the same points at different heights, God often brings us back to familiar themes with greater depth and understanding. Each return is an invitation to respond differently, to apply what has been learned, to grow beyond previous limitations. The fear that often lingers beneath endings is the fear of being forgotten. When something important ends, we worry that it has erased us, that our efforts will fade without acknowledgement. Yet God is not forgetful. He remembers every faithful step, every unseen act of obedience. Nothing offered to him is lost. Even what appears insignificant becomes part of a greater whole, woven into a story that extends beyond individual moments and visible results. As God continues to rewrite, he may lead you into spaces that feel unfamiliar or uncomfortable. New beginnings rarely take place on well-worn paths. They require courage to step into uncertainty, to embrace learning, to accept that growth often feels awkward before it feels natural. God does not promise that the new will be easy, only that it will be meaningful. Meaning, unlike comfort, has the power to sustain you through difficulty without hollowing you out. You may also discover that some relationships shift or fade during this process. This is not always a sign of failure. As you change, your needs, values, and direction may no longer align with certain connections. God does not remove people carelessly, but he does recognize when attachments hinder growth. Letting go can feel like another ending layered onto the first, yet it may be necessary to make room for relationships that can support who you are becoming, rather than who you once were. Throughout all of this, God remains remarkably gentle. He does not force transformation, he invites it. He respects human freedom, allowing resistance, doubt, and even withdrawal, but his invitation remains steady and patient. The very fact that you are still wrestling, still questioning, still longing for meaning is evidence that the story is not finished. A closed story produces no questions, no hunger, no movement. The presence of longing is often the sign that something new is drawing near. As days pass and seasons shift, you may begin to notice subtle changes. A thought that once triggered fear now passes with less power. A memory that once caused pain now carries understanding. A future that once felt empty begins to suggest possibility. These are not coincidences. They are signs of a story being rewritten from the inside out. God does not always announce his work, but he leaves traces for those willing to notice. And so the journey continues, not toward a neatly packaged resolution, but toward a life increasingly shaped by trust. The end you feared does not vanish, but it loses its authority to define you. It becomes a chapter rather than the title, a turning point rather than a conclusion. God's rewriting is ongoing, unfolding through ordinary days, quiet decisions, and steady grace, continuing to shape a narrative that refuses to be limited by what once appeared final, a narrative still being written even now, sentence by sentence, moment by moment, as you learn to walk forward without needing to see the whole page, trusting that the hand guiding the pen has not slipped, has not grown tired, and has not finished telling the story yet. In that unfinished space, where certainty has not yet returned and clarity still feels distant, something honest begins to grow. It is not the confidence that everything will work out neatly, but the quieter assurance that meaning is still present even when outcomes remain unclear. God does not rush to replace mystery with answers. Instead, he teaches the heart to live without constant resolution, to breathe in unanswered questions without suffocating under their weight. This kind of faith does not eliminate doubt, it learns how to carry it without letting it rule. As time moves forward, you may notice how your attention shifts. Where once you searched desperately for signs of rescue, you begin to notice signs of sustenance. God provides enough strength for today, not the entire journey at once. He offers daily bread rather than stored certainty. This daily provision is intentional. It keeps the heart engaged, dependent, awake. If you were given everything at once, you might stop listening. By giving only what is needed for the next step, God invites you into a continual relationship rather than a one-time transaction. It is easy to underestimate the importance of ordinary days during seasons of transition. When life feels unresolved, we often dismiss the present as merely a waiting room for something more meaningful. But God does not treat waiting as wasted time. He inhabits it. The routines you maintain, the responsibilities you honor, the kindness you show even when motivation is low, all become part of the rewriting. Faithfulness in small things shapes the soul to carry greater things without being crushed by them. There is also a subtle freedom that begins to emerge when you stop demanding that every experience justify itself immediately. You learn to allow moments to exist without rushing to interpret them. Joy no longer needs to be permanent to be real. Sorrow no longer needs to be explained to be valid. God's rewriting teaches you to live more fully in the present, not because the future is unimportant, but because the present is where transformation actually takes place. You may find that your understanding of strength changes during this time. Strength is no longer the absence of weakness, but the willingness to continue despite it. God does not remove human fragility, He works through it. The cracks in a life are not failures in design, they are openings through which grace enters. A rewritten story often bears visible marks of its past, not as signs of defeat, but as evidence of endurance. As God reshapes your inner life, your expectations begin to soften. This does not mean you stop hoping, it means your hope becomes less fragile. It no longer depends on specific outcomes to survive. Instead, it rests in the belief that God can bring good out of circumstances you would never have chosen. This kind of hope is resilient because it is rooted in character rather than circumstance. It endures disappointment without collapsing into despair. The passage of time plays a quiet but significant role in this process. Time does not heal on its own, but it creates space for healing to occur. God uses time to reveal patterns, to deepen understanding, to mature responses. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable, not because it mattered less, but because you have grown more capable of carrying it. Growth rarely announces itself, it is often recognized only in retrospect. There will be moments when you are tempted to look back with longing, imagining that returning to what was might ease the discomfort of becoming something new. Memory can idealize the past, smoothing over its difficulties and magnifying its comforts. God does not condemn this longing, He understands it. But He gently redirects the gaze forward, not by denying what was good, but by reminding you that the past, however meaningful, was never meant to be permanent. In the rewriting of a story, forgiveness often emerges as a central theme. Forgiveness of others, yes, but also forgiveness of self. You may carry regret over decisions made, words spoken, opportunities missed. God does not rewrite by pretending these things never happened. He rewrites by redeeming them, by weaving even regret into a narrative of learning and humility. Self-forgiveness is not excusing failure. It is releasing the false belief that failure has the authority to define you forever. As this release takes place, you may notice a growing lightness, not because problems have vanished, but because their weight has shifted. You are no longer carrying them alone. TR redistributes the burden, allowing God to hold what you cannot. This sharing of weight is one of the quiet miracles of faith. It does not change the external load immediately, but it changes who is responsible for sustaining it. God's rewriting also reshapes the way you view others' stories. You become less quick to judge and more willing to listen. You recognize that everyone is standing somewhere in the middle of a sentence, often misunderstood, because their story is not finished. This awareness fosters patience and compassion, qualities that cannot be learned in theory, but only through lived experience. The pain you once questioned now becomes a teacher. There is a particular kind of courage that forms when you continue to move forward without applause. Many seasons of transformation are invisible to others. From the outside, your life may appear unchanged, even stagnant. But God measures progress differently. He sees the battles fought in private, the choices made when no one is watching, the prayers whispered rather than proclaimed. These moments, though unseen, carry profound significance. As the new beginning slowly takes shape, it may not arrive as a single dramatic event, More often it unfolds as a series of small realizations, subtle shifts, and quiet decisions. One day you respond with patience where you once reacted with anger. Another day you choose hope where you once chose withdrawal. These moments mark the arrival of the new, not with fireworks, but with faithfulness. The fear of another ending may linger even as new possibilities appear. Having been wounded by loss, you may hesitate to trust again. God does not demand reckless openness. He invites wise courage. Trust grows gradually, tested and strengthened over time. God understands the caution that comes from pain and does not shame it. He works within it, slowly rebuilding confidence. No. In circumstances, but in His presence. As you continue, you may realize that the question you once asked so urgently, "Why did this happen?" begins to lose its urgency. It is replaced by a different question, quieter but more constructive. Who am I becoming through this? This shift marks a significant turning point. It does not eliminate curiosity about the past, but it reorients focus toward growth rather than explanation. God's rewriting is never rushed, yet it is never idle. Even when you feel stuck, something is moving. Even when progress seems invisible, formation is occurring. The absence of immediate results does not indicate the absence of purpose. God is at work in layers deeper than circumstance, shaping a life capable of carrying meaning that will extend far beyond a single season. And so the story continues to unfold, not in a straight line, but in a rich, textured narrative filled with pauses, revisions, and unexpected turns. The end you once feared becomes integrated into a larger whole, no longer isolated or overwhelming. It finds its place within a story that continues to expand, shaped by grace rather than finality, guided by a hand that does not rush to finish but patiently continues to write, allowing each moment to add depth, each season to contribute weight, and each unanswered question to remain open just long enough to draw the heart forward, attentive and willing, into whatever words are still being formed on the page. That willingness to move forward without demanding closure becomes a kind of quiet strength. It does not announce itself as bravery, yet it steadies the soul in ways that loud confidence never could. God seems to value this steady willingness deeply. It is the posture of someone who no longer insists on understanding everything before obeying, who accepts that faith often means walking with incomplete information. This posture does not eliminate fear, but it refuses to let fear become the author of the story. As this way of living settles in, you may begin to notice that disappointment no longer has the same power to harden you. Where once it might have driven you toward bitterness or withdrawal, it now becomes something you can acknowledge without being overtaken by it. God is not removing the capacity to feel deeply, He is teaching you how to feel without being consumed. Emotional maturity grows quietly, marked less by intensity and more by balance. The rewriting of a story also involves a reordering of loves. God gently reveals what you have depended on too heavily, what you have asked to give you meaning, that it was never designed to provide. This revelation can feel like loss, because it often involves loosening attachment to things that once felt essential. Yet in that loosening, space is created for something sturdier to take root. God does not strip away for the sake of emptiness. He clears ground for what can actually sustain you. There is a certain clarity that emerges when lesser things lose their grip. You begin to recognize what truly matters, not in theory but in practice. Time is spent differently. Energy is guarded more wisely. Words are chosen with greater care. These changes may seem subtle, but they signal a deeper alignment taking place. God is not merely changing circumstances, He is reshaping priorities. You may also find yourself less interested in proving anything to others. The need for validation weakens as your sense of worth becomes less dependent on external approval. This does not make you indifferent to others. It makes you freer to love without bargaining. God's rewriting often replaces performance with presence, striving with sincerity. The story becomes less about impressing and more about becoming. As days turn into months, the memory of the ending that once dominated your thoughts begins to recede. It does not disappear, but it no longer occupies the center of your attention. New concerns, new responsibilities, new joys begin to claim space. This shift is not betrayal of what was lost. It is evidence that life continues to expand. God does not require you to live forever at the sight of your pain. He invites you to carry what matters forward while allowing the rest to rest. There will still be moments when the past resurfaces unexpectedly, triggered by a familiar place, a sound, a conversation. These moments can feel like setbacks, but they are not. They are reminders that healing is not linear. God does not interpret these returns as failures. He meets you there again, offering steadiness rather than condemnation. Each time you encounter the past with greater understanding, its power diminishes. The new beginning God is shaping may eventually become visible to others, though it rarely looks the way anyone expected. It might not resemble success as the world defines it. It may appear quieter, simpler, less impressive, but it will carry a depth that could not have existed without the journey you have taken. God's work prioritizes substance over spectacle. What lasts is rarely loud. As you grow into this rewritten story, you may notice that gratitude begins to emerge in unexpected places. Not gratitude for pain itself, but for what pain has clarified. You become thankful for resilience you did not know you possessed, for insight gained through struggle, for the compassion that now flows more naturally. Gratitude in this sense is not denial, it is recognition of growth. The fear of being left behind also begins to fade. You realize that life is not a race with a single finish line. People move at different paces, follow different paths, carry different burdens. God's rewriting frees you from constant company. Comparison. Your story does not need to match another's to be meaningful. It only needs to be faithful. As trust deepens, prayer becomes less formal and more integrated into daily life. It is no longer confined to specific moments but woven into thought and action. You find yourself turning toward God instinctively, not out of obligation, but out of habit formed through experience. This ongoing conversation shapes the story from within, guiding decisions large and small. There is also a growing tolerance for ambiguity. Questions that once demanded immediate answers now coexist peacefully with trust. You learn that not every mystery must be solved to be lived with. Some truths reveal themselves gradually, others remain partially hidden. God does not withhold clarity to frustrate, but to keep the heart engaged, seeking, open. As the rewritten story continues, you may sense an invitation to contribute rather than merely endure. God often uses restored lives to participate in the restoration of others. This does not always take dramatic form. It may be expressed through listening, through presence, through small acts of faithfulness. Your story becomes a quiet testimony, not proclaimed loudly, but lived consistently. The humility learned through endings becomes a safeguard against pride. You remember how easily things can change, how fragile certainty can be. This memory keeps you grounded, attentive, grateful. God values this humility because it keeps the heart teachable. A teachable heart remains open to further rewriting, further growth. You may also recognize that joy, when it returns, feels different. It is less frantic, less dependent on circumstance. It carries a calm assurance, aware of pain but not ruled by it. This joy is not naive, it has been tested. God does not restore joy by erasing sorrow, but by integrating it into a larger understanding of life's complexity. As the narrative expands, you begin to see that the end you once feared did not shorten your story. It deepened it. It added layers that could not have been written any other way. God did not abandon you at that moment. He entered it with you, quietly guiding the rewrite even when you could not see the words forming. And so you continue forward, not because everything is resolved, but because something within you has learned how to move without resolution. The story remains open, responsive, alive. Each day adds a line, each choice a phrase, each moment a tone. God's hand remains steady, patient, attentive, continuing to shape a narrative that refuses to be confined by what once seemed final, continuing to unfold through trust, learned slowly, hope refined through waiting, and faith practiced not as certainty, but as daily willingness to remain present, listening and ready for whatever words are still being written. So if you stand now at what once felt like the edge of everything, do not rush to name it an ending. Let it remain what it truly is, a threshold. The God who has been quietly rewriting your story has not brought you this far to abandon the sentence unfinished. What fell apart did not escape his notice, and what still feels unresolved has not slipped from his hand. The same presence that sustained you in confusion will steady you in clarity when it comes, and the same grace that met you in loss will meet you again in renewal. You are not living in the aftermath of a failed plan, but in the unfolding of a wiser one, hidden with patience, mercy, and purpose deeper than you could have imagined. And as the story moves forward line by line, you may one day look back and realize that what you once mourned as the end was the moment your life finally began to speak with a truer voice, shaped not by fear of what was lost, but by trust in the one who never stopped writing.